Welcome back to DSP Leaders World Forum. It's Wednesday the 13th of May, and coming up now is our session on emerging tech, the new wave of innovation. But before we start, a quick reminder that if you want to ask questions later or join the extra shot with Ray the Major programs, then get in touch with us as soon as possible, and do it today if you can. Details are on TelecomTV, along with our poll question, which we'd love you to complete. And so to our panel, emerging tech, the new wave of innovation. As network operators design their next generation networks and figure out their new operational strategies, so they encounter a plethora of new acronyms and terms that sound useful, but may be little more than slideware. So, which emerging technologies and networking techniques can simplify network operations, help reduce costs, and enhance business opportunities and customer satisfaction without creating new complexities and challenges? Well, let's ask our guests, and I'm delighted to introduce Mirko Voltolini, who is Global Head of Network on Demand at Colt, and Andrew Coward, CEO of Lumina Networks. Mirko, Andrew, hello to both of you.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Andrew.
As we try and cope with the COVID-19 pandemic, are we now seeing the importance of having a modern, agile and responsive business for CSPs? And what role does transformational technologies, which we've been talking about for a number of years now, what role do these play? Andrew, perhaps we can start with you.
Yeah, I think it's obviously been hugely interesting to watch how much additional capacity has been placed into networks, or is being placed into networks very, very quickly. And it's remarkable to see that that's actually possible and can be done in such a short time frame. And I think for those service providers that have been the most successful and quick at doing that has been linked directly to the fact that they have automated or have been able to automate a lot of the infrastructure for provisioning, management, control, and so on. So that as they add more capacity, it can automatically and doesn't require people, manual interventions to configure, manually test, all those kinds of things that would have traditionally happened only a few short years ago. So it's actually a testament to the progress that we've made around automation that this has been possible.
And Mirko, same question to you. Has these past few months really underscored the importance of having this robust, agile, and responsive business?
Yeah, so definitely has been quite important, and I think we have built capabilities to support that. We have seen an increase in traffic demand, which has gone up by 30-40%, and as a connectivity player, we saw requests for upgrades and for setup of new capacity, new connectivity. I think speed has been one of the key elements. So besides the opportunity of having automation, so not requiring manual intervention, being able to set this connectivity up in a fast real-time fashion has been instrumental. A couple of the things we have seen is, in addition to speed of delivery and automation, is the requirements for business continuity and resiliency. So being able to spin up additional connectivity, maybe alongside the existing connectivity, has been one of the other learning from this phase. We built an on-demand capability, and has been quite instrumental for us to support growth of customer connectivity during the last couple of months.
Thanks. And Andrew, has it also highlighted the importance of having a software-driven approach for telcos?
Well, I think for the telcos that have actually deployed that way at reasonable scale, then yes, in a number of ways this is playing out. So software, meaning moving to software instances of what were previously hardware elements, such as firewalls, NAT gateways, and so on. So the kind of infrastructure behind the infrastructure. So having that on general compute and being able to turn up instances, within the cloud, that certainly helps. But I think kind of more important, or just as important, is the role of software in configuring and managing the networks from end to end. So, for example, when you're provisioning a service, having the optical domain, the IP domain, the radio domain, all the different elements be orchestrated in one movement, absolutely makes a huge difference to how quickly you provision. And to give an example of that, if you think about how long historically it would have taken just to provision a new service, so here in the US from New York to San Francisco, I mean, you could be talking 6 weeks plus from an end customer perspective. And now with automation tools that are in place, certainly with our customer base, that provisioning action now takes seconds or minutes versus days or weeks. So that's the impact, if you like, of having software tools and management across the network that looks at these things kind of end to end holistically versus individually manually configuring these things.
And Mirko, you highlighted the importance of business continuity, but what also about the supply chain? Has the past few months shown that we maybe need to pay more attention to the supply chain and more broadly the whole sort of end-to-end ecosystem?
So yes, certainly we have discovered or seen in practice the requirements to have a very robust supply chain in place. I mean, luckily we have a number of suppliers in the network space, and we have more than one in each of the key domains. So we haven't suffered this, but certainly made us consider well across the whole set of layers how this works. So definitely.
Well, let's look ahead towards the future, because we are talking about emerging technology and the next wave of innovation. I'll ask this to both of you, but Andrew, to what extent should telcos be planning now and preparing for tomorrow? How far ahead should they be looking in terms of technology R&D and implementation?
Well, I think telcos always have looked, pretty far into the future in terms of planning cycles and what they look to do and so on. And you see that in how long it's taking for 5G to come to market and get out there in the real world, and not just 5G, but the technologies that sit behind that and some of the benefits we expect to gain from it. Those plans extend well into the future for most carriers. To the point, actually, we think about it, it's been quite frustrating how long it takes to get to adoption. But I think perhaps by way of example, if we think about SDN, the control of infrastructure through abstraction, those types of things that we've been talking about for 5 years plus now as being important and relevant. We've only really seen the kind of large scale adoption of these types of technologies in the last couple of years. And it's taken that long for the maturity of the technology to be out there, the interoperability things, and also if you're deploying things, all the regulatory environment. So I think we're used to those long cycles. I think it's just been said, in relation to COVID and what we're going through now, if we were trying to do this 5 years ago, I think we'd had a very different result, just in terms of the ability to deploy quickly and so on. So I guess for all of the hype, if you like, around a lot of the technologies we've been talking about, this is demonstratively that those things are now deployed and deployable at scale, which is why we've been able to achieve the success we have.
And Mirko, do you think as an industry we look sufficiently far ahead, or is there a danger that we can look too far ahead, and those cycles just get too long and things get lost?
I think you need to have a multi-tier approach in terms of R&D, and I've been working on technology and product R&D for my whole career. You need to have something which looks into the next 18 months to a couple of years, and that's more about existing technology, maybe at the early stage of maturity, and focusing on use cases and how to adopt those capabilities as fast enough. And also you need to look into the long term, so beyond, let's say, 2-3 years, into more difficult to predict technologies and capabilities, and I think you have to have a balance between the two. But I think in terms of maybe picking up on the comments Andrew made, it's also important to focus on execution. And if you wait for, you have to have a pragmatic approach. So the short-term plans needs to focus on adopting technology at as early as possible without worrying too much about the level of maturity. Otherwise, you wait for too long. We've been an early adopter, for instance, of SDN technology, went to market quite quickly as soon as it was available. The same for NFV, and that's imperfect because you don't have the level of maturity, the tools in place to manage that technology. But if you wait too long, then you will not reap the benefit. So that's our approach. I think another thing to consider in the innovation R&D area is innovation has changed dramatically over the last few years, from an internally focused capability to a customer-focused capability. So the approach of co-creation with customers become instrumental. You can't anymore just focus internally and maybe work with the suppliers, but working with customers is fundamental. The other element to consider is the fact that componentization of technology, and so the disaggregation has enabled service providers to really innovate. I think before we have been much more reliant on vendors and maybe monolithic systems to deploy, and so innovation in the service provider space has been driven by the vendor plans, and now we have much more opportunities with disaggregation.
Andrew, as Mirko has just said, disaggregation leads to a lot more opportunities. Are they reshaping network planning options?
Yeah, so just from, well, you've got disaggregation and you've also got kind of reassembly into the services that you need. I think it's really interesting if you think about how all of the elements that we bring together to put into a network, we first disaggregate and separate them out. Think about how we can reassemble them, and then reassemble them through software into what ends up being new services. And so when we think about things like that are coming down the line that we're going to need, like network slicing, for example, which will be a big topic for this whole series of DSP leaders, you think about how a slice itself gets brought together from many disparate elements across the network. To deliver that performance guarantee, that latency requirement, the bandwidth requirements, and the scale that's necessary. All those come from the fact that we've been able to disaggregate the various components and then reassemble, if you like, into what's required for that slice, for that customer, for that application. And so a lot of the work that's happened over the last few years, if you like, around SDN, around NFV, is essentially creating these building blocks that enable us to then deliver these new service characteristics that are going to be so important for the monetization of 5G.
Mirko, there's been so much focus over recent years on NFV. Perhaps the development of SDN hasn't received the same attention, but how has SDN developed and becoming more suited to your needs?
I think you cannot look at NFV without SDN. You may be able to do vice versa, but you need a very strong software control capability to be able to reap the benefit of the disaggregation that NFV brings. We have been focusing on actually building an SDN control platform to enable customers to control services with our on-demand capability. And I think has been our original focus, bring to market a capability that would allow our customers to take control of setting up connectivity, modifying connectivity. NFV comes along with that as an evolution, as an addendum to the platform. So being able to not just simply software control of connectivity, but also software control of individual network functions on top of it. So there's a combination of two really makes the capability quite powerful. I think maybe going back to one of the points raised earlier regarding disaggregation, another element to consider is key ingredient in the technology space here is API adoption. if I look at what has been happening in the service provider space, so I was talking about the fact disaggregation brings a lot of opportunity. You divide capabilities into components, and then those components can then be recombined in multiple different ways to create services and to enable internal innovation. That opportunity also comes with a price. The price is complexity. So before, again, we were relying on the vendors to put together all those components, and what we used to get is a system built up for a certain service, and then everybody in the market used to get the same capability. And so competition differentiation has been quite hard. Now with this opportunity of creating different capabilities, combining building blocks, we have some complexity as well. So we need to be able to bring all those components together, and integration has become the challenge internally. So we have moved from just purely deploying and integrating components from the vendor with our OSS is now into gluing together different components, and API have become the key element of making this as simple as possible.
So if we keep our eye on the future, Andrew, what are some of the key technologies that are going to power the DSP, the digital services provider of tomorrow? Can we highlight some of the important tech that we really ought to be watching out for?
So one of the key technologies that's driving a lot of the kind of background for this change is the move to open source. We think of open source as something that's been around a long time now, certainly in compute space, but in networking, the adoption is only really begun to pick up over the last couple of years, particularly in the SDN space. And an open source here is an absolute requirement because it creates this kind of level set. So to Mirko's point around having different vendors and the complexity that creates, one of the things that you want to make sure is that you're kind of running off a common platform, an abstracted platform. That means that as vendors come along, they're fitting in and slotting into something that's already there that you know works, that the APIs are standardized to your customers, to your cloud, to all the different components that drive that. And so what that means is when a new vendor shows up with a proprietary solution, whatever it is, that's proprietary, then that's great, but it fits into an open source framework so that the open source basically is providing this kind of control layer, but also the abstraction into the rest of the network. And for all the talk about all this new stuff, reality is that the existing network, the network and equipment that's already there, that's going to be there still in 5-10 years time, needs to be controlled and brought into whatever it is that you're doing with these new amazing services and new amazing technologies. And so using and leveraging platforms that, as we do, like Open Daylight, for example, where you're controlling the legacy equipment as well as all the new NFV technologies together, and abstracting that becomes this important framework. So I guess the argument is that nothing really happens with all this new stuff unless you can basically co-opt in the existing network into a way that enables you to take advantage of all the technology choices that we're going to have as we go forward.
So, Mirko, telcos do have a huge installed base of legacy equipment. That's not going anywhere fast, but new technology is coming on. There's new thinking, new methodologies. What are some of the things that have got your attention that you think we need to be looking at and focused on over the coming years?
Okay, well, where to start? There's lots of an increased amount of innovation happening in technology space that we can leverage. One area we're looking into is the adoption of AI for both internal and for customer use cases. There's been a significant, I was mentioning earlier, there's been a significant increase in complexity in managing a disaggregated network, and we believe AI and what we call closed loop automation, where you can use network information coming from the systems and the network to feed back into the control of the network itself in an automatic fashion through the adoption of AI and machine learning will be key in managing this complexity. We can't rely anymore on, again, very simple monolithic system, or let's say simpler monolithic systems for our operations team to manage. We need to inject automation, not just in the creation of services. We've been talking about SDN controlled activation and modifications, which is our platform, what our platform is based on, but also automatically fixing fault, understanding where to troubleshoot network issues. So AI plays a key role in that space.
Andrew, you've already mentioned network slicing earlier in the discussion, but we're focused on things like intent-based networking as well. We've got segment routing. We've talked about AI. There's a lot of tech coming. There's a lot of tech out there. How much of this is tech that really is going to get off the page, get off the PowerPoint, and get into the network now?
All right. So you kind of have to think about the use cases that are playing out here in terms of what does it actually mean for the end user, and what are we trying to achieve? So if you take some of the things that coming to the fore, like virtual reality, augmented reality, over wireless, connected car, car-to-car communications, all of those things, they require that the network react in real time, very quickly, that resources around the network can be moved, that problems in the network, to Marco's point around AI, resolved, automatically and quickly. So the adoption of technologies that sit behind these services are really what's going to drive, whether something succeeds or it doesn't. And so, to the point around network slicing, that's an absolute fundamental building block around being able to deliver these services, meaning the network isn't ubiquitous anymore. Sorry, it's not. It needs to be different for different applications. Whereas if you take things like segment routing, very important technologies for scaling, and indeed widely adopted already. So for each of the challenges, if you think about it, to get from the first billion devices to 5 billion devices to 20 billion devices requires a step change in the scalability of a lot of these technologies. And so the things that enable that to happen, the things that enable us to scale, are the things that win. And a lot of the things that we're talking about now, frankly, we've been talking about for a long time as the kind of baseline of this technology is coming down the line. Now it's baked. Now we're starting to get to some pretty large scale deployments. And I think just at the level of scale that routing requires and the network requires, then we're into those deployments now, and that's great to see. I think what comes down the line next is just this step function, this order of magnitude that's needed to grow these services. When we think about the 5G, and we talk about 5G being about handsets, I don't think 5G is really about handsets from a step change. It's really about IoT and the kind of long tail of devices that will join the network with all kinds of characteristics that are going to be needed, from a simple water meter that reports in once a week to having a video crew out on the street recording something in 4K, with an interview taking place in real time to a 5G network. Those are kind of extremes of different services that each will be serviced by a combination of these things that we're now deploying.
Mirko, we talk about software a lot when we talk about the emerging technology and new technology. Software gets a lot of attention, but what about hardware and innovation in the silicon? Is this an area that is just as important?
Yeah, it is, and I think the importance is increasing as new domains have been added to the telecom space. So I think traditionally the importance of hardware has been in innovation in speed, photonics, and routing. So increasing more and more the speed of our devices to be able to cope with the significant traffic demand. Now the other domain where is becoming important after the initial deployment is the compute space. I think if you look at the evolution of NAV, the initial efficiency of white box x86 based machine was not comparable to the traditional telecom purpose built hardware, and now we started to see that there is a need to focus on improving efficiency in the hardware space for x86 components. If I look at the unit cost of white boxes, they still need to go down to be comparable with the cost of traditional applications. So I think it's important. Again, certainly the innovation will continue in the pure increasing speed space, and now needs to focus more and more into the compute space. There is a lot of thinking. How do we get above the more low limitations, as now components in the compute space are becoming reaching the point of the maximum capability. So this is where the focus needs to be at this stage.
Yeah, and I think it's also about a price point conversation. So it's fascinating. One of the reasons that the 2G networks haven't been turned off yet is actually because of IoT, and the fact that IoT devices that run on a 2G network, don't require a lot of data upload and so on, works perfectly well, but it also has an amazingly low cost point. And so for 5G to take over, if you like, from IoT, it's not supplanting 4G or 3G technologies, it's supplanting the cost base of having a 2G modem. We have to get to that price point to get to mass deployment, so that 5G chipsets show up in everything that we buy from a consumer perspective, or are out around us as we make our way around the world. So that cost base is really important for the industry to get right and commoditize at vast scale.
A final question to both of you. This tech development and ensuring we have the waves and waves of emerging tech is reliant upon innovation. We do need the innovation to continue. We need a good culture for innovation. Do we have the right environment? Is there anything else we can do to encourage and support the levels of innovation we need? Mirko?
So one of the key things I mentioned already earlier is that this co-creation, we need to move to in the past, used to be much easier for single organizations to innovate, and it was more internally focused than maybe working with the research industry. And now the need is to move to an ecosystem type of environment where as partners, vendors, competition, and customers work all together to co-create capability. I think we need to move to a more platform-based approach where all the various parties, competitors, and producers can really work very, very closely together to leverage. I think there is an incredible amount of capabilities now available in the market. We talked about IoT, AI, and network plays a key role in that space as well.
And Andrew?
Well, no, we don't have the right level of funding and innovation taking place in our environment. It sounds very strange to say that, given all this wonderful new tech we're talking about. But the reality is that the funding, if you like, for anything involving this new technologies are often going to players that are thinking about the new applications. So thinking about the next killer app, the next Facebook, the next app that's going to consume all our time, versus the innovation that's required to actually drive the network. And so when we think about funding and the VC community, that money is not going into companies that are really driving innovation inside the network and infrastructure. And that's a problem. And it's not up to, frankly, it's not up to the large incumbent vendors to drive that innovation. That's just not in their nature at the pace that's needed. It's for the startup community. That's what's traditionally happened. And so we have a gap right now. And so for all the wonderful things that we're deploying now, that's great. But I think there's a gap between that and what we're expecting. For example, when we deployed 4G, we were already talking a lot about 5G and what that would mean. We're deploying 5G right now, but there's not a huge discussion around what 6G means. And I suspect that's a lot related to the fact that we don't have this innovation level of investment that's going in, that's going to create problems down the line. So definitely challenges to come here until and unless the carriers together with the VC community step up and start investing.
Mirko, there's just one more point I'd like to ask you. We've talked about a lot of technologies. We've covered a lot of them here, but I don't think we've mentioned blockchain. Does blockchain have a significant role to play in the future of CSPs?
I think, yeah, it does. Is more in the mid to long-term future, although we have ongoing activities in this space. So I look at specifically the carrier-to-carrier market, where there is lots of inefficiency, lots of manual. We work lots of manual processes in place. We work with each other, and everybody's reliant on everybody else if you deliver connectivity services across the globe. So I'm talking about international carriers, whether it is voice and data. And if you look at all the various processes on the overall value chain, from sourcing to the financial processes, there is lots of manual steps in place. So we have the opportunity to replace a lot of those manual steps and processes with a blockchain-based technology where carriers can interact and engage with each other using a trusted distributed system. So that will require, I'm saying that it will take some time because it will require adoption across the carrier community to really make it worthwhile for everybody to participate. That's where the area of blockchain definitely is going to be in the space.
Well, we're going to continue our coverage of emerging technology as the year develops. And Andrew, we've got plenty to say on the subject of 6G, so we shall revisit that very soon. But for now, both of you, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme. If you have any questions for our guests or any additional comments or views you wish to add, then please do get in touch with us. And if you want to be part of the ongoing conversation, then you need to join us on our brand new discussion programme, Extra Shot, with TelecomTV's editorial director, Ray Lemaitre. Get in touch with us now through social media or email. Otherwise, please take a look at the sessions that we've already held. They are all available for on-demand viewing now here on TelecomTV, and we'll be adding future sessions to the archive as the week goes on. Coming up next on DSP Leaders World Forum 2020 is our session on people and processes for cloud-native telcos. And you'll be able to watch that tomorrow from 8 a.m. UK time. But for now, a final thank you to our panelists and to you for watching. Goodbye.